we have Eric Metzgar. Eric Metzgar, PhD, is a filmmaker from Triton Films, an ethnographer who has been documenting and writing about traditional arts and skills of Micronesia for over 40 years. After first studying with the late Grandmaster Satuali's navigator, Jesus Yurupi, and later his Lamotrek son, Master Navigator Ali Halialur, he was initiated into the Wariang School of Navigation as a Palu navigator in a post ceremony held on Yap in 2015. Yeah. Let's welcome Eric Metzgar.
Yes, hi. Hello,
Hi.
Soro. Hey, Frank, long time no see. There's the first slide I have. Okay. Before I talk about the presentation that I'm going to give, I just want to thank my brother Larry from Lamotrek for his deep knowledge. The Kapitalawa, we call it the talk of the canoe, and it's so holistic and so deep. What you're going to see here is completely the opposite. Very didactic in terms of, I would say, the presentation that Larry just gave. But I don't want to waste any time because I know Pete is following me. In fact, I thought Pete was going to come before me, but it really doesn't matter. So this title of my presentation, Sea Lanes of Antiquity, Canoe Voyaging in the Mariana Islands. I want to say that at the end, there's a 4-minute clip, basically, that I hope will evoke what Larry was just talking about and chanting, to give you a feeling for what it was like 200, 300, who knows how many years ago. So before I start the presentation, I just wanted to acknowledge that Larry's knowledge goes deep and the stories he tells are very important to continuing the seafaring. Okay, so first, next slide, please. Okay, I'll skip through this abstract, which is just the summary that's on the, oh, we just switched to that slide, okay. What is the earliest evidence we have of canoes in the Mariana Islands? The earliest evidence before European contact comes from archaeological studies. Next. Next. At the entrance to the Liang Calavera Cave of Skulls in Saipan, there is a pictograph depicting a human figure in a canoe. Next. We see here the outline of the canoe and the human figure in the canoe. Next. So here's a map showing where the Calavera Cave is on Saipan. Now, archaeologists believe that the pictograph actually is 1,000 years old, 1000 AD is what archaeologists believe it may have been created. That's based on the Lati artifacts that were found in the cave. It could have been earlier because Saipan was settled by 1500 BC, along with Tinian, Rota, Guam, in the southern part of the Marianas chain. And that's another 1500 years. So who knows? Anyway, the pictograph is the first image we have of a canoe in the Mariana Islands. Next. It's not clear when the northern islands were inhabited, but a current thinking is that they were settled much later than the southern islands. The earliest radiocarbon dates for Pagan suggest that the islands capable of supporting settlement were occupied by 1300 AD, which is after the time that archaeologists believe the making of the Calavera canoe pictograph was created. Next. So what kind of watercraft was used to settle these islands? Was it a raft, as some people might think, who drifted to the Mariana Islands? Was it a raft with a sail from Taiwan or between Taiwan and the Philippines? Or was it a canoe with a sail? Next. Unfortunately, we do not know the answer to that question because no archaeological remains have been found, probably because it was almost certain that the materials that went into their making were entirely biodegradable, and also because sea levels were higher and covered the coastlines where most of the settlements were located. Next. So what is some of the early historical evidence that we have of Chamorro voyaging canoes? Actual documents is what we're talking about. Next. In 1521, you guys all know this, when the Spanish expedition led by Ferdinand Magellan visited Guam, Francisco Alvaro made this observation, quote, "Many small sails approached the ship, sailing so swiftly they appeared to be flying." Now remember that adjective, flying. Next. Although inaccurate with regards to the rigging of the sail, this early sketch by Antonio Pigafetta shows the basic features of a Chamorro canoe during the time of Magellan's visit. You see here the outrigger with a pontoon and a canoe hull that looks vaguely similar to the one that we saw in the pictograph. There's the mast, but look at the sail, looks like a Spanish galleon sail. So you can't trust necessarily these illustrations. Next. In 1565, Legazpi ships anchored at Guam and more than 400 canoes came out to meet them. The swift Latin sail single outrigger canoes made such a favorable impression on all who saw them that they became known as the flying proas, which became the catchword or words for the type of canoe that they saw in the Mariana Islands. Next. Here's some illustrations of canoes. I'm sure Pete will go into this more. I won't talk about it. I'll probably just skip through, but you get the idea. Some are more accurate than others, like the one on the right looks absolutely absurd to me. Next. There are accuracies and inaccuracies. The one to the right here is probably the most accurate, but there's one that is always pointed to as being the most accurate. The one that's best. Go to the next slide. This is the one. In 1742, the Anson expedition captured a flying proa in the Artinian Island, and it was dismantled by Lieutenant Percy Brett in order to make an accurate scale drawing of its measurements. It's called a Sachman. That's what a voyaging canoe is called in Chamorro. And it measured 40 feet from end to end. The flying proa was considered to be the premier voyaging canoe in Chamorro culture. Next. And this is the drawing that is believed to be the most accurate representation of the flying proa known to exist. Next. The focus of this presentation is on voyaging canoes and the sea lanes and oceans that they traveled. So what are some of the reports of voyages of flying proas that have been documented? Next. I'm not going to read through all of these. These are examples. I'll basically summarize them. But the first one is interesting because it comes so early. It's the first one that I know of. In 1597, Father Fray Los Angeles, who is considered the first missionary in the Mariana Islands, was the first to report that Chamorros voyaged in their flying proas between the Mariana Islands for the purpose of bartering fish. So you can imagine these flying proas going throughout the Marianas chain, even up to Pagan. The 3 points I want to make is that there was two-way voyaging. These are reports basically proving that there was two-way voyaging all the way up to Pagan, even beyond the Maug, where Father San Vittori's took proa up there to baptize Chamorros, the Christian religion. But they also sailed to the Philippines and on emergency trips. For whatever reason, the governor needed to get to the Philippines. They trusted these canoes so much that they would go 1,500 miles all the way to Manila. Then there were also expeditions to the south to try and discover the Caroline Islands because they hadn't been really discovered. There were only a few sightings. And so there were also Chamorro canoes that were taken down there to explore that area. So they were very confident they could do it. But we know very little about those expeditions or those voyages. So continue to the next slide, please, because I'm short on time. It's difficult to say when the last traditional flying proa sailed. In 1742, the English Commodore George Anson observed several of them sailing between Tinian and Guam. I'm not going to read the rest. I'll just summarize it because I'm short on time. With the reduction of the Chamorros, in other words, the genocidal acts that the Spanish perpetrated on the population, and when they removed them from their islands in the northern islands to the south, to Saipan, and then eventually to Guam, there was also a drastic drop in population from 40,000 to 4,000. So you can imagine what happened to the skill sets. They just crashed. And as a result, the knowledge was more or less lost. Plus the Spanish devalued it to the point where they would break up the canoes, not allowing them to sail. In any case, by the time the Freycinet expedition visited the Marianas in 1819, the Chamorros no longer were building and sailing flying proas, much less attempting voyages to other islands. Moreover, with the settlement of Carolinian islanders in the Marianas beginning in the early 1800s, there was an increased Spanish dependence on Carolinian proas to perform the necessary inter-island travel. So they basically took over the job that the Chamorros formerly had. Next slide, please. Okay, now this is the Carolinian section and the connection between the Carolines and the Marianas. So what is the earliest evidence we have of Carolinian canoes in the Mariana Islands? Next slide, please. So here we have a chant that was collected in 1909 by Wilhelm Müller as part of the German expedition to the Caroline Islands. And it's a chant called The History of Yongalu, who was a real person, a navigator, and he was a Eulithian who sailed all over the place. In the chant, he sails to the Philippines, he sails south of Palau, but the important thing here for our purposes is this quote that I translated from German. He goes to Feist, which is in the Caroline Islands, and then sails from Feist and goes to Guam. So this suggests that there was connection. Not only does he go to Guam, he comes back and then he continues to sail to the east. So that's one piece of oral history that is evidence that there was a connection between the Caroline Islands and Guam. And then there's another one. Next slide, please. This is a Truckees chant or Chuukese chant called The Pulling of Olap's Canoe. And it is, some people think, and me included, an Itang chant because it's got a lot of encoded metaphors, which are difficult to decipher, but this translator who translated it into English attempted to, and in one section, he tries to translate this particular line, which translates as, but Manina is there and Sorota is here. So the translator suggests that Manina may be the Marianas or the Mariana Islands. The next slide, please. But I don't think so. It is unlikely that Manina in the chant refers to the Mariana Islands because the old Carolinian name for Guam and the Marianas is Mariales. The term Manina has, however, been recorded as referring to Manila and the Philippines. So I think they're talking about Manila and the Philippines, not the Marianas. But there is evidence that Sorota may refer to the island of Rota in the Southern Marianas. It's a similar name appears on one of the earliest maps ever made of the Mariana Islands circa 1545. And this is where it gets interesting. Next slide, please. So here's a map showing the Mariana Islands in 1545 or around that time. The one on the right, you see North America, South America, and then indicating where Marianas is. And on the left, that's the Mariana Islands. For unknown reasons, Antonio Pereira did it upside down. So Guam is at the top and the Northern Islands are at the bottom. Who knows why? But it's still important. Next slide, please. This is, I'm not going to go into this too much in detail, except to tell you that a historian, Armando Cortezao, he makes the case that S. Ruta is Rota Island in the Mariana Islands. Next slide. So can the name Sorota in the chant be a cognate of the Chamorro name S. Rota on Pierre's map of the Marianas Islands? I think it's possible because Sorota could be a Chuukese Itang metaphor referring to Rota Island. And there is additional evidence too in the chant, which suggests that Srota is an esoteric code word for Rhoda. Next slide. Why? Because the navigator chant gives two additional clues as to the region in the vicinity of the Marianas where the voyagers are sailing. Next slide. One clue is this whale, which in the chant is called Parosa. And the other one is the name for the channel to West Fayu Atoll. Next slide. Parosa the whale is a sea marker northeast of West Fayu Atoll between the Caroline and Mariana Islands. The sea marker in the Poku system of navigational lore aids the navigator in orienting himself while at sea. West Fayu Atoll is a traditional jumping off island for Carolinian voyagers sailing to the Marianas. So that's basically indicating that they're sailing to Rota, or in this case, Sorota, which is the code word. Next slide. No one knows the age of the chant for certain, but from other stories about Olap, the navigator, we know that it is ancient. The chant is not proof of pre-Spanish contact, but it strongly suggests that Carolinian voyagers were aware of the Mariana Islands and traveled there in the pre-contact period. Next slide. What is some of the really historical evidence? Now we're talking about documentation. Next slide. In 1664, before the Spanish colonization of Guam, which started in 1668 with San Vitores, a fleet of canoes from Ifluk and the Central Caroline Islands were storm driven to the Philippines. 5 years later, the survivors were befriended by Father Francisco Miendez on Siao Island in what is now Indonesia. The map the Iflukans made of their island world has been lost, but the information Father Miendez collected from them has been preserved in a letter he sent to Manila. Next slide. The map that the Iflukans made for Father Miendez may have looked something like this. This was made in 1710 by some other Caroline Islanders, somewhat later than the Piera map. The map the Iflukans made. But unlike this map, the Iflukans included an island in the north, which the Iflukans called Silial. Next slide. The Iflukans told Father Miendez that they knew about Silial Island before 1664 because, quote, some swords and a little iron come there as well. This could only mean one thing, that the Carolinians were having trade relations with the Mariana Islands before the Spanish colonization of Guam in 1668. Next. Given the description of Silial Island by the Iflukans and its geographic location, Silial Island could only be an island located in the Marianas archipelago. Unknown to Father Miendez at the time is that Silial is the traditional Iflukan name for Tinian Island. Next. Okay, here's a story that Larry just talked about. Here's some more details about it. In 1788, the famed Lamatrac navigator Luito from Lamatrac retraced the route of Guam with, quote, a song from olden times. Next. Luito told the Spaniards that their ancestors had previously traded with the Chamorros, but had given it up after witnessing Spanish cruelty. Next. In the pre-Spanish era, the Yappies too conducted voyages to the Marianas to trade. Since it was difficult and dangerous to sail directly into the prevailing northeast winds, the Yappies had to take a longer and more arduous route through the Caroline Islands to Guam. Next. So anyway, later in 1814, the Lamatrac fleet to Guam consisted of 18 canoes. This is the time when Lamatracese, as Larry said, were starting to settle Saipan. And they traded canoes, tortoiseshell, and other things for iron, which they desperately wanted, and glass beads, which they wanted to trade also with yap, cloth, and other items. Next. After 1815, Carolinians formed settlements in Saipan with permission of the Spanish governor. In exchange, the Carolinians agreed to convert to Christianity and provide inter-island transportation, as well as deliver meat and produce from Tinian to the garrison in Guam, which was similar to what the Chamorros had done for the Spanish with their flying proas 100 years earlier. Next. Okay, I have to rush through this because I think I'm just about out of time and I want to play the clip. So I'm going to show you now some sea lanes, the names of sea lanes. Cut to the next slide. The body of ocean that separates the Mariana and Carolina Islands is the Metalawol. Because of its size, the Metalawol seems more like a sea than a sea lane, but nevertheless, Carolinians view it as a large seaway to a large island chain. Thus, the meaning of Metalawol, or ocean to a superior place. Next. The other three sea lanes have their own characteristics. The Metalawut between Guam and Rota is called sea lane with strong current, and the Metalawut, I can't pronounce this, that sea lane between Rota and Tinian, including Saipan, is called sea lane for special people. And the Metalawut between Saipan and Anatahan is called sea lane of the Nehege fish. Next slide. So this is our last slide. And I want to share with you a song for the opening of the sea, similar to the chant that Larry just gave. Yes, I hear something. Okay, it's a chant that has to do with crossing the Metalawol Guam and a song from olden times. So to close this presentation, I want to play the Sumatao chant that here was sung by the Grandmaster Navigator Yuripi. Okay, Frank. Thanks, Frank.
All right, thank you very much, Edgar.
Can you
Okay,
hear me?
we have a question from Dr. Larry Cunningham. He says,
Yeah.
what is the name of the sailing routes in the Marianas?
Oh yeah, well, that was one of the last slides. The one between. I went through so fast, probably skipped it. So there are three of them that we know of between Guam and Rota. That's the Metalawut, the route of strong current or sea lane of strong current. Then there's the other one, has his name I can't pronounce. It's the sea lane for special people between Rota and Tinian and Saipan. And then Saipan to Anatahan is the sea lane of the nage fish, which is a kind of surgeon fish. We don't know the sea lanes between Anataha and Pagan, but I believe there probably were, but obviously they've been lost. If any, that's area for research.
All right. We have another question. Is there any evidence Yappies traded in the Marianas and mined disc money, probably stone money?
Good question. Yeah, there is some evidence that they attempted to mine stone money first before they went to Palau. So it was very difficult, and so they gave it up. In fact, there's a story they call it Acho, the stone money in Guam, and but there's only one report of an attempt to mine stone money on Guam, very small pieces. There may be some in museums around, but I don't think there's anybody who's really researched this enough to actually nail it down to prove that the stone money that's in the museums came from Guam. It'd be an interesting area for research.
Here's a question from Edward Young Guerrero. Is there archaeological evidence of Carolinian items in the Marianas predating the 15th century?
Yeah, I believe there is spondylus shell. There hasn't been enough research done on this, but I think if I were a detective, I would start to compare the spondylus shell, which was a very important trading item in the Caroline Islands, specifically in Yap. They use spondylus shell a lot there as a valuable trading item. So I wouldn't be surprised if Carolinians went to Guam to get spondylus shell or even took it there to trade. And there is archaeological evidence, I think in Tuman, of spondylus shell predating the 15th century. I'm not an archaeologist, so that's a question for an archaeologist.
But I think you present some good points there. Here's another one. Metawalwo could connotate sea lane to upper area rather than superior area. This is from Don Rubenstein.
Yeah, I think it's debatable what the translation would be. That's a real area for a linguist to get involved with. All I know is that there are different versions of the translation for Metalawol, and that's the Lamatrekese Woollian spelling. Then there's the Sadawoli spelling, and then there's a Polawati spelling, but they all basically, and there again is the area for a linguist to try and nail that down. And I heard one story actually that there was a previous name before the Spanish arrived. There was another name, but when the Spanish arrived, then it's like it was a big place because there were these white people there and they were superior to us and they had iron. So I don't know if that story is true or not. It's just one of those versions.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Thanks for the questions.
Yep.